Does your bone broth not gel every time you make it? Well, today I'm going to give you 3 tips that are going to make sure that your bone broth always comes gelatinous and to solve the problem once and for all. Hi, sweet friends. I'm Mary, and welcome back to Mary's Nest, where I teach traditional cooking skills to make nutrient-dense foods like bone broth, sourdough, ferments, and more. So if you enjoy learning about those things, consider subscribing to my channel, and don't forget to click on the little notification bell below. That'll let you know every time I upload a new video. Well, I have heard from a lot of you that your bone broth just doesn't come gelatinous. And so today I want to go over 3 tips, plus a bonus tip at the end, that'll help you get to that point where you get a nice gel on your bone broth. The first tip is that it starts right at the beginning when you're picking out your bones. There are 3 types of bones that you need to have when you're making bone broth. Now first, let's just back up a bit and talk about broth, stock, and bone broth. They're all different. Broth is made with meaty bones, primarily the meat, and very little bone. And the reason is that what you're making is a high protein liquid. You brown the meat, it could be a shank, it could be a 7-bone-in chuck steak, something along those lines that has a lot of meat but very little bone. You brown it, you brown it right in your stock pot, you cover it with water, just to cover about 1 inch, add some aromatics, and you simmer it for about 45 minutes, and you have a lovely protein-rich broth. Broth is great to make when you're in a hurry and you just want a nice base for a soup, and it gives a nice profile of proteins that come from muscle meat, the big bulk of the meat that's on the smaller bone. Stock, on the other hand, is made from just bones that have very little, if any, meat on them. And primarily, you make a stock. If you're making a beef stock, you're going to make it using marrow bones. You'll take your marrow bones, you'll put them on a baking sheet, you'll add also onto the baking sheet the various aromatics you're using, your onions, your carrots, your celery, and you'll brown everything in the oven. Now the marrow bones are not going to brown up much, but whatever little bits of meat are on them will brown. And then, but the big place where a lot of the browning is going to take place is with your vegetables. Then you're going to put everything into your stock pot. You're going to deglaze the baking sheet or whatever, roasting pan, whatever you used to roast everything. You're going to add that liquid into your stock pot, and then you're going to finish it off with additional water to cover. And you're also going to add to the water that the bones and the vegetables are in some type of acid. You can put a little bit of vinegar, you can put some wine, you can put some fortified wine, whatever the case may be. But unlike broth, stock is mostly bones, and you want to be able to extract the collagen that is in bones. Now, collagen is a protein, and it's a protein that makes liquids gelatinous. Now, collagen is a protein. It's just a different type of protein that's in muscle meat. So broth brings one profile, so to speak, of proteins to the table, and stock, made with primarily just bones with very little meat on them, brings collagen, which is a different type of protein, to the table. So broth brings one type of protein, and stock brings another type of protein. The nice thing about bone broth, which is different than broth and stock, is that it's a combination of bones. Now, broth will be watery, and stock will be somewhat gelatinous, but not a tight gelatinous like gelatin, more of like a very loose gelatinous nature is what stock will have. But bone broth should be very gelatinous once it's cold, specifically beef bone broth, what we're talking about here with the bones today. And the reason is because you're going to choose these 3 types of bones. You're going to choose your meaty bones. You can use shanks, you can use neck bones, bones that have a lot of meat on them. Then you're also going to choose your marrow bones for the collagen that's released from the bones, and also the marrow, which you can eat separately or whip back into your bone broth. But then third, you want to make sure you pick your high cartilage bones. So you want to look at oxtails, knuckles, or patellas, which are the kneecap. And the reason is because cartilage contains another type of collagen, and that will make your bone broth very gelatinous. And the whole point for making bone broth is to get that different profile of proteins. You get the protein from the meaty bones, you get the protein from the particular type of collagen that's released from the marrow bones, and then you get additional protein that's released from the cartilage in the high cartilage bones. So now you have this wonderfully diverse profile of proteins in a wonderfully gelatinous rich liquid. And our bodies can use that diverse profile of proteins. Plus, the high gelatinous nature of bone broth helps nourish our gut, which, I've discussed, in detail in previous videos, that once we nourish that gut, we make a wonderful environment for probiotics to thrive. And when probiotics thrive, the good gut bacteria, scientists tell us it makes us overall healthier. And what's so important about having that highly gelatinous rich bone broth is that it helps us digest our food better, the other foods that we eat in addition to the bone broth. Plus, it helps us, as we digest it better, it helps us absorb the nutrients from the other foods we eat better. And that just is a win-win, because the food we eat, we eat the food, we take the bone broth, and we really get every little last bit of nutrients out of what we're eating. So if you want your beef bone to gel like Jell-O, your first tip is to remember to always choose those 3 types of bones. You want some meaty bones, some marrow bones, and then some high cartilage bones. That's going to give you a good gelled bone broth, beef bone broth in this case, and a very nutritious beef bone broth, which is the whole reason why we're making bone broth. Now, we're going to talk about chicken bone broth later on, but now I want to move on to tip 2. The reason your bone broth may not be gelling, even if you pick all the right bones, is because you added too much water. Once you get all your bones into your slow cooker or into your stock pot, just put enough water to cover, just about an inch above the bones. Don't put any more than that. If you put too much, you may dilute it. Now, don't worry, if you put too much water in and it doesn't come gelatinous, it's still nutritious. You just have diluted the gelatin. And you don't want to dilute the gelatin. You want to keep your bone broth as gelatinous as possible, because the more gelatinous it is, the more nourishing it is to our guts. So just remember, once you get all your bones in, all your veggies, and so on and so forth, I'll link to the video where I show how to make bone broth, because you're going beef bone broth specifically, because you're going to put your bones in just with enough water to cover, and you're going to bring it up to a boil, but then you're going to turn it down to low right away, and just skim off any foam that comes on top, and then you'll go in and add all your aromatics. Just make sure that everything's submerged, have no more than about an inch of water above, and that will be perfect. So remember, tip number 1, make sure you pick the right bones, the right combination of bones. Tip number 2, don't add too much water, just about an inch above. Just make sure everything's covered and submerged. And now tip number 3, and I know a lot of you have talked to me about that you've made this mistake, and you're happy from previous videos that I've shared to learn this. So for anybody that's new, I want to share tip number 3 with you. Don't boil your bone broth. I've had people write to me and tell me they have been boiling their bone broth for 12, 24, 48 hours. Don't boil your bone broth. Just bring it up to a boil and immediately turn it down to low. Just skim off the foam that comes to the top. That's the only reason we're bringing it up to a boil initially. Just to have that foam come up to the top, be able to remove that. Sometimes it has a little impurities in it and whatnot, and it'll also help the final product be a little clearer, and that makes it more appetizing. But you bring it up to a boil and immediately turn it down to low. And just skim the foam. And when you get it down to low, you eventually want to test it with some type of meat thermometer or maybe a candy thermometer, something that you have that you can submerge into liquid. And you want to make sure that you're simmering your beef bone broth, which should be simmered for just 12 hours. You don't have to simmer it for 24 hours, 48, 72 hours. You can just simmer it for 12 hours. Now don't discard the bones when you're done because you're going to reuse those to make another batch. But I discussed that in other videos, which I'll link to. But in any event, you want to test it with your thermometer and make sure that it's simmering at 180 degrees Fahrenheit. And for my friends across the pond and in other parts of the world, I wrote this down. I believe that's 82 or around approximately 82 degrees Celsius. So you'll want to simmer it at 180 degrees Fahrenheit. Now don't worry if it gets a little warmer than that. The collagen that comes out of the high cartilage bones is pretty tough, and it can withstand the heat if it gets a little above that. But the bottom line is you want to just have it on a low simmer. Around 180 degrees Fahrenheit is what's perfect. And basically what you're going to be looking for, whether it's in a slow cooker or on your stovetop in a stock pot, is basically bloop. I always tell you like this, bloop, bloop, just little bubbles coming up, intermittently like that, not blah, 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 just bloop, bloop, bloop. And so if you don't have a thermometer, that's basically, and for years I didn't, and I always had a nice gelatinous bone broth. So I just had it on the lowest setting on my stovetop in a stock pot, or in my particular slow cooker, which I've shared with you in the past, the keep warm setting is 180 degrees Fahrenheit. So again, you're going to need to experiment with whatever type of vessel you're making your bone broth in. But the bottom line is if you have a thermometer, you're looking for around 180 degrees Fahrenheit. And if you don't, you want to look for just boop, bloop, bloop. You don't want a rolling boil, obviously. You don't even really want to simmer. You want the lowest of simmers that just have a few bubbles coming up intermittently. So that's number 3. Don't boil your bone broth. Just bring it up to a boil, but then turn it down to low right away and let it simmer beef bone broth for 12 hours at approximately 180 degrees Fahrenheit. So I want to talk about chicken bone broth, and I also want to give you a bonus tip, but I just want to review. Number 1, pick your bones wisely. Make sure you get a variety of the 3 types of bones we discussed. 2, don't add too much water, just enough to cover. And 3, don't boil your bone broth. Just bring it up to a boil, but then turn it right down to low and let it simmer on very low heat for 12 hours. Now I want to add a bonus tip here, and this is something that's not always in our control, but I want to bring it up to you, especially when you're reusing your bones and you wonder why maybe on your second or third batch it's not coming as gelatinous as you would like. When we discussed making perpetual bone broth, and I'll link to that video in the iCards and in the description below, where we reuse our bones for a second or third or fourth, fifth, whatever the case may be, batches of bone broth, some of us found we were able to get 2 or 3 batches, and a lot of it depends on the bones and whatnot, and you can watch those videos and learn more. But some of us, even using the same exact bones, group of bones, some of us were able to get a gelatinous batch of bone broth on the second batch, following our instructions exactly the same. Some of us were not. Some of us were able to get, the second batch gelatinous, but not the third batch, when others of us were able to get the third batch gelatinous. Well, I did a lot of research on this, and I found out something very interesting. The collagen in bones can vary. The collagen in the bones of younger cattle is going to be greater than the collagen of bones coming from older cattle. Not unlike us. I have less collagen than someone who's 20. So that's something that we may or may not have control over depending on whom we're getting our bones from. Do we know the source? Do we not know the source? And so that's not something we can always control. But The good news is we should at least be able to get our first batch gelatinous. And whether our second or third or so on and so forth batches turn gelatinous can really depend on the age of the bones. However, that said, we learned that with beef feet, you can get very gelatinous bone broth, and you can get many batches of gelatinous bone broth from feet. It seems like feet have a lot of collagen no matter what their age. And I'll be sure to link to that video where I show how to make bone broth using beef feet. So when you reuse your bones, if your second or third batches don't come as gelatinous or even gelatinous at all as you would like, know that it's nothing that you did. Maybe your bones, the bones you were using, were from older cattle as opposed to younger cattle. But it's still nutritious, so never throw it out. And the good news is that even if only your first batch of bone broth, of beef bone broth specifically, is gelatinous, you're way ahead of the game, because as we discovered, and I'll link to that video in the iCards and in the description below, we found out that after we priced everything out, that bone broth made at home, beef bone broth made at home, is less expensive than anything we can buy at the store. And the level of quality, night and day. What you can make at home is so much better than what you can buy from the store. And it turned out to be considerably less expensive. Now, before I move on to talking about chicken bone broth, and why chicken bone broth pretty much will always come gelatinous, even if you mess up, don't worry about it. We'll talk about that in a minute. But before I do move on from beef bone broth, I want to mention that some of you have asked me, where do I get my bones? And I've shared, from the grocery store, specialty stores, farmers market, and also I've bought them online from US Wellness Meats. And I love to shop at US Wellness Meats. I've been buying bones from them for years. The quality is always excellent. They're organic, they're grass-fed, and there's fantastic consistency. And the folks at US Wellness Meats have given me a coupon code, promo code, discount code, whatever you want to call it, for my viewers for 15% off regularly priced items. It's fantastic. And so we don't have to worry about waiting for emails from them when they have sales and so on and so forth. And they sell a lot more than bones. They sell all kinds of meat. They sell chicken. They sell chicken feet, which we will be making some bone broth with chicken feet soon. But in any event, I'll put a link in the description below so you can learn more about that. Now, I want to say a few things about chicken bone broth. When you make chicken bone broth, you can pretty much always be a success. And the reason is it goes back to what we discovered about the age of the bones when we were talking about beef bone broth, that the younger bones have more collagen. Well, today, most of the chickens that we buy are young chickens. So the bones of the young chickens are rich in collagen. So you'll often get a very nice gelatinous, rich, gelatin-like gel from your chicken bone broth once you refrigerate it. So if you're just getting started with chicken bone broth or you're new to it, I'll link to my video where I show you how to make roast chicken bone broth, which is terrific. I mean, it's literally costs pennies because you're just going to use the carcass from a leftover chicken that you roasted. And if you can get them, throw in a few feet. But using the carcass from a roast chicken is going to make a tasty chicken bone broth, and most likely quite gelatinous. So making chicken bone broth is a good place to get started if you're a beginner. So I really wanted to get all that information out to you because I've been getting a lot of emails and a lot of questions about how to get your bone broth gelatinous. So hopefully these 3 tips have helped. Now, I want to move on to another subject for a minute. As you may know, this is the first Sunday of the month, and that's usually when I give you my weight loss update. Well, the only reason I'm not giving an update is because my weight hasn't really changed significantly over the last month. I've been a little sidelined because I hurt my foot and my ankle, and I'm actually wearing a boot and using a cane. So that's really kind of, as I said, sidelined me from my usual walking program, which really helps me considerably. But I have maintained, so that's good news. And I actually had a few funny comments from a couple of fellas who are viewers, who are real keto enthusiasts, who told me, although kindly, lay off the carbs. But they were very well intentioned, and they're really trying to help me. They're really my cheerleaders and cheering me on. And they have been encouraging me to lean a little more keto. And we'll see. I made a keto bone broth, and I put it up yesterday, uploaded it yesterday. I think I need to go back and watch that myself, but I'll also link to it here in the iCards and in the description below. Plus, if you want the full recipe for the keto bone broth and the directions, you can go over to my website, marysnest.com, and you can print all that out. And when you're over there, if you want, you can sign up for my newsletter. And don't worry, I don't inundate you with email. But you can sign up for my newsletter because I'm in the throes right now of working on a new website that I think is going to be really streamlined and very navigatable. I don't know, is that a word? And I'll let you know in an email when I get ready to launch that new site. And I'm very excited about it. It's going to take me a little while. It may not be until this summer, but if you sign up for my emails, I'll definitely let you know when the website's released. And I'm going to be putting up a lot of recipes and embedded videos, and it's going to be real nice when it's all finished. If you'd like to learn more about traditional cooking and making nutrient-dense foods like gelatinous bone broth, be sure to subscribe to my channel and then click on this video over here where I show you how to make beef bone broth from start to finish. And I'll see you over there in my Texas Hill Country kitchen. Love and God bless.